It's the weekend, and you have financial questions that need answering. That can only mean one thing. It's time for Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome to Jill on Money. It is a big weekend for sports fans. Week 1 of the NFL. And, Mark, finals of the U.S. Open. Who are you pulling for? Oh, you can't say. Don't say it. Not Maria Sharapova anymore. Flame out. Oh, you're not a Maria Sharapova fan? Wow. All right. And she's a juicer, Mark says. So, all right. I'm a moderate NFL fan, not a big one. I just, why not? Why? Because it takes too long to watch a football game. It's just too, I could be that person who watches the highlights of every single game and be excited, but it's just to sink in for one whole game. I can't do it. Can't do it. Sorry. Anyway, this is not a show about sports. It is about how to take the mystery out of your financial life. And I'm Jill Schlesinger, and Mark Talercio is running the show from behind the glass. Mark, the best producer in the world, in case I haven't mentioned that enough. 855-411-JILL. That is our phone number. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. So let's start with first caller, John in Chicago. Hello, John. Welcome to Jill on Money. How can we help you out?
Hi, Jill. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I love the show, love the podcast, and all that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So my question is about my upcoming marriage. I'm marrying my beautiful girlfriend, Kim, in July of next year. And I had questions about, one, what are some best first steps for new couples who are merging their finances together? And two, how to best navigate living and sharing a financial future with someone who has very different savings and financial habits.
That is so kind, just the way you described it. I have a great feeling about this relationship. Don't call me back in 3 years and tell me you're divorced, okay? That's number one. Because already I feel like it's like very kind the way that you figured it out. Okay. So first, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you guys differ? Is it about the disparity of what you're bringing into the relationship or what you earn?
No, not necessarily. So I work in sales. I do pretty well. Kim is a PT. She's doing well as well.
Okay.
But the difference, I think, is kind of in our background and how we were brought up with financials. My dad's an accountant. He worked in finance for 30 years and has kind of passed on his high risk tolerance to me through his advice with how I should handle my money. Mm-hmm. And her parents, and therefore Kim, are both very conservative with how they choose to invest and save.
Okay.
So the first conversation we had that was a major difference was she had a very low payment on her car that she purchased 3 years ago, and was immediately set off to try to pay that down, whereas I had always understood if you have a low rate, you have the freedom to invest a little bit and try to make above the return for the low car payment.
Uh-huh. How'd that go over?
Indicative of everything.
How'd that go over?
Well, she was open to the idea, but she was just very unfamiliar with how that works.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, in general, what I think is interesting about that is, first of all, kudos to you guys for having the conversation. One of the things that I believe is important in your sort of looking forward is to kind of figure out where you're going to come together and where you're going to keep things separate. I think that it will be difficult for you to kind of convince her to be like, hey, take a ton of risk with your portfolio, right? Because that may be like a too much to ask. But if you're talking about, hey, you know what? When you have a 0% car loan, I don't know what her car loan is, and you explain the background of it, and you say, you know, you're a 0% car loan. Let's take the difference of like that 0% and have you put more money into your own retirement account, and she can buy into that. That's great. But if she's generally sort of a balanced investor and you're a really aggressive investor, it's okay for you guys to kind of have two separate approaches where you're more aggressive in your retirement account and she's maybe more balanced. So I like the idea that you're kind of telling her this is like use of money kind of conversation. But tell me about what it's like when you're talking about the different ideas around saving, either for retirement and investing.
So I think that is where we're going to ask for some guidance from you in particular, because, like I said, I'm a very aggressive investor, as I've been taught. But Kim does not really invest at all outside of the 401k account she has through her work.
Mm-hmm.
And we have difficulty savings at times. I mean, we're paying for a wedding. We've had a lot of friends who have been married, and we've done some travel to be around for those events. So I was hoping you would be able to help us find a middle ground that we could agree on as being like a good checklist for the first year, 5 years of being. Let's
do a year, because I don't want to do 5 years. That's like too hard. All right. So I think that first of all, if I were you, just because you keep your finances, you have a little bit of a different sort of approach. I think that you don't need a joint checking account, and you don't even need a joint investment account. But what you need is a joint goal. So you can say, we're both going to save for retirement. What should that mean? That should mean, how old are you guys?
I am going to be 29 in a month, and Kim is 28.
Okay, so I think that at the very least does she work for an organization, or does she have her own retirement plan? Is she a freelancer?
No, she works for a hospital here in the city.
Okay, so if she works for a hospital and you're working in sales, I imagine, are you putting away the max in your retirement account?
I'm putting away 6%, and my employer matches up to 50% each year. Okay,
here's what I would do. After the wedding, because like you said, you got to save some money for the wedding, I want you both to put away 10% into your retirement accounts. 10, okay? I know you can do it because you're saving money right now. Do you have debt, you yourself, John, or are you coming into this with any debt?
No, Kim and I are both debt-free.
Okay, great. So
here's payment is done.
Loan's
done, all that.
Okay, so once you get done with that, so you basically have big tasks. You say once the wedding is over, because you probably want to, pay for that in advance, right? You're going to make sure you've got 6 to 12 months in an emergency reserve fund. You're going to both be putting away 10% into your retirement account, and you are going to essentially not do anything else with that in terms of like going forward. If you're going to, there's no paying down of mortgages and there's no paying down of 0% loans. Get to your 10% and your 6 to 12 months. Once you do that and you talk about your investing outlook, then I would say this, you're probably more of a growth investor. If she's not even like a 50-50 investor, we want her to be a balanced investor. But essentially, your tasks are to try to get to debt-free, 6 to 12 months in emergency reserves, and at least 10% in retirement savings. And I want you guys to get into the maximum amount for retirement savings. Hopefully that helps. Thanks for calling, John. It's Jill on Money, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Eight 855-411-JILL. That's the number to call to have your financial questions answered. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back with Jill on Money. All right, I gave John in Chicago short shrift. God bless him. He hung around. He said, come on, I want more. And you know what, John? You want more, we give you more. You're listening to Jill on Money. If you, like John, would like to be on the program, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email. Ask Jill@jillonmoney.com. Now, John and his intended bride, Kim, are getting married. And while they save for their wedding, which they're doing a good job of, they're going to be putting, let's say, about 6% into retirement. But John and Kim have different investment philosophies and savings philosophies. So before I went to the break, John, I said you should be making sure you're debt-free, essentially, consumer debt-free. Then make sure you've got your 6 to 12 months in emergency reserves. And then I wanted you guys to get to 10% each in your retirement savings accounts. How does that sound as a big three for the next year?
I think that's doable. I like those three goals, especially the part where we're going to save up $15,000 to $30,000 for our emergency savings.
Yeah, I think important. That's a biggie, right? And so I guess I was wondering also from, you said that Kim is your intended. She's more conservative than you are. Is she also more conservative in her actual investing in her retirement accounts? Because you guys are in your late 20s. So I will say that I don't want her to be too it's one thing to be conservative in terms of, gosh, I want to make sure I have a little bit of extra money in cash. But what about her investments? Is she more conservative in that side of the world?
No, she uses one of the target funds.
Oh, great.
The 2055 fund
okay.
That I think is appropriate.
All right, great. All right. And what about you? You're a big risk. First of all, your father's a CPA. You shouldn't be a big risk taker because I think CPAs tend to be a little bit more conservative. So tell me what else is going on.
Dad bucks the trend in that a lot.
Nice.
He had actually trained me from young in my college years that we were investing in individual bonds and individual stocks, if you can believe this.
Really? Do you do that still?
I do.
Okay. Notice my pause. I'm listening. Tell me what else is going on in that account then. And where do you do that? In your retirement account or in a non-retirement account?
Actually, I'm in 3 or 4 different funds in my 401k through work.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have individual stocks picked in a non-retirement account.
How much money is in the individual stock account?
$120,000.
What? You're holding back on me. How much is in the 401k?
401k is 40-45.
Uh-huh. And the 120 is individual stocks and individual bonds. What's the split, would you guess?
It's exactly 80-20. I'm very
okay.
Very fortunate to follow that closely.
Uh-huh. And do you is all of the money that's sitting in this account, is this essentially all gains? Because you're so young, I can't even imagine that you have any losses in this account.
I'm down on some that I invested in recently, but yeah, it's positive account.
But why are you putting money in your individual stock account that's a non-qualified after-tax account, but you're not maxing out your retirement account? I don't get that.
The logic that was always put to me by Dad was having it available for liquidity if you need it. So you have to pay a penalty if it's in a 401k account as opposed to doing it in an individual brokerage.
Okay. How much money do you have in cash right now? Like forgetting about the stocks, just like an emergency reserve.
In cash, I have $12,000.
12. And what it would be 3 to 6 months of living expenses for you guys? What would that number be? Would that be closer to more like 30? Is that what you're saying?
15 on the low end, 30 on the high end, yeah.
Oh, how about if we split the difference and call it, we want to get you to double it. We want you to put, instead of 12, we'll put 24 in there. How about that?
Okay.
What I think you should do immediately is you have plenty of liquidity. You own something, right? You own a home or a condo? What do you own?
Yeah, we have a condo.
Sticking around that condo for a while?
3 to 5 years, yeah.
What's it worth?
$240.
What's the outstanding mortgage on the property?
We've only been in it for a year, so probably 190 of it left.
What's the interest rate?
4.5.
Okay. All right, so don't pay that down. That's nice. And what are you guys going to be earning together? What's your combined income?
I mean, it varies some because of my career choice, but each of the last 3 years we've combined to be over 130.
Okay. All right, now I'm going to revise what I said to you. You ready?
Okay.
Whatever you think you have in your individual stock losses for this year, I would take my losses against some gains, and I'd free up $12,000 from those individual stocks and put it in my emergency reserve fund, something your father's going to hate. So don't tell him to do it, that you're doing it. The reason is...
I'll share this call, Jill. That'll
my
be my way of
God.
getting around it.
All right. Just say this chick. I do some work with the American Institute of CPAs, and I love them. But I think that emergency reserves should be in a boring cash account because that's why it's there, because you don't want to be at risk. Because if the market fell by 25%, that 80% position would be down. And then that's not really an emergency reserve fund. Selling at the top at the bottom doesn't feel like a really smart move. But now here we are, as markets are, pretty close to their highs. What I would do is I would take my losses against my gains. I'd get another $12,000 into that emergency reserve. Because as you said, your income is variable because you're in sales. So I would have a slightly larger emergency reserve fund. I would never pay down my 4.5% mortgage unless they change the mortgage interest deduction, which I don't think they're going to do for you. And then what I would do is I would stop putting money in that account because let's say that once you free up your money and you take some losses and your gains, you got $100,000 in there. That's fine. That's plenty of money. But I would absolutely max out your 401k. And so instead of 6%, you can put up to $18,000 in there. I don't see why you wouldn't do that right now to get your retirement assets growing. You've already saved the money you need in your non-retirement account in terms of, yes, it's liquid. Like even if you said, I'm going to buy another house or I'm going to move up in 5 years, you have that $100,000 that's invested. You've got the equity in your condo. You're going to be fine. But what you're not doing is taking advantage of the tax code that allows you to save money with the help of Uncle Sam. And so that I would do. And I think that would make more sense for you. Look, you listen to me. I am not a fan of individual stocks. I do not believe that stock picking is something that, most people want to spend their time doing. Are you telling me that you love it and it's great? Fine, you can do it. But, all the research has shown that, in fact, picking stocks in general is unlikely to produce really good long-term returns that are consistent. In other words, buying an index may be better for you. Now, don't go sell those individual stocks because you've got big gains. But that said, now that I have a little bit more of your picture, I want you to fund that emergency reserve fund. I want you to sell your losing stocks and take the gains as well so you can reduce that stock position a little bit. And I would be shoving in all the money that you were putting into that individual stock and bond account, and I would be putting it into my 401k. I would max out my 401k. I would not pay down that condo loan. I wouldn't accelerate the payment of that. But I absolutely would be very interested, because you are in your late 20s, for you to be pushing your money away. I know that maybe there's a kid and, that's going to come up. You can always kind of shift your allocation around. You can maybe say, hey, of the $100,000, if we're going to have a kid, maybe we're going to have more costs. All those things can come later. But for right now, at the very least, John, even if you don't get $18,000 into that 401k, I think you should be at 10% at the very least. And if you're super nervous and you want build up more cash in that stock account, sure, but do it after. By the time you're 30, I want both of you guys to have 10% into that retirement account. All right. I could probably do an hour with him. Could do a whole financial planning show. Anyway, if your dad wants to come on the show and talk, have him call up. We'll do like a conference call with you and your dad. It's Jill on Money, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Wondering how to make your money work for you? Get on the line now, 855-411-JILL. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back with Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, we'd love to hear from you. Our phone number here is 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. Now, don't forget, I am the senior CFP board ambassador, and I do a whole bunch of videos for them, and Mark is so kind to post them on our YouTube page. which is not Jill on Money, which it should be. But am I giving up on that or not? Oh, all right. Well, it's linked to something or other. What do I know? Anyway, search Jill Schlesinger on YouTube and you'll get it. And you can check out our podcast, Better Off, Apple, Stitcher, Google Play, SoundCloud. Ask Alexa, ask Siri. I don't know who you're asking. That whole concept of having people, talking to people, I don't know. Anyway, check it out. Check out the YouTube channel search under Jill Schlesinger. Okay? Here's a question we got as a nice email here from Andrea, who has a question about her 401k. She's got the option to contribute pre or post-tax. She currently contributes pre-tax because she can put a larger percentage of her income into retirement. Because obviously when the government gives you a tax deduction, you can put more in and not feel the impact on your paycheck. So she wants advice on how to best manage it. She's married. She has a kid. She's 35. It's interesting. In that, I don't know everything about you guys. The best way, I think, for you to consider the pre versus post is, do you think that your income will rise in the future? Because if it were to rise in the future, then you might be able to kind of lock in today's tax rate before your tax bracket jumps up. I don't know if it really is going to do that, but I mean, she also says that her husband contributes to a 401k and a traditional IRA. It might be nice for you guys to have some money that's already been taxed when you get to retirement. So that's something that I would absolutely consider. In terms of how to invest, what I would say is that if you're 35 years old and you've got a nice long time horizon, you generally are going to look to be let's say a moderately aggressive investor. I mean, again, I don't know your all of the ins and outs of how you view risk, but you do have a long time horizon. So, a growth investor could be 70% in risky stuff, 30% in not so risky stuff. Could be 80-20, depending on your feelings around risk. But I think that would be it. And if you really hate doing this, I think that, you may want to think about a target date fund. It depends on your plan. I don't know. We'll have to see. You follow up with me. I really would love to see your choices. Why don't we do it that way? So please, please, please send us your various options within the 401k, and then we can help you out. All right? Thanks for writing. Here's one from Fred in California. Says, wants to talk about reverse mortgages. And he basically said that he was interested in a reverse mortgage some years ago. He lives in a 16-story high-rise. Each unit is valued at $1 million to $7 million. And he was told reverse mortgages don't work in these condos because of occupancy rate, multiple owners, and other conditions. Have things changed? We got that question from, remember, the Condo Association in Chicago area? So no, it hasn't changed. And maybe that's better off. I don't know. I'm so worried about this whole reverse mortgage market, but no changes. So we can't help you out with that. Okay. Let's do this last one who, I don't have the name. He is 85 and retired. His wife is 78, and they both have IRAs, and he's got a bunch of questions. His wife's got a large amount in profit sharing, and he wants to take $25,000 out and put it into her IRA. Can it be commingled with other funds and be part of her required minimum distribution? Does it have to be a special fund in the IRA? I think that if the profit sharing plan allows you to do a direct transfer into an IRA, you can commingle it. I would double check with the place where you hold your IRA. Next, would taxes have to be paid on these funds if the funds were paid directly to the IRA and the check made out to the IRA? Again, if you can do a direct rollover, it should not mean that you're not taking a distribution from the pension. You're doing a rollover from the profit sharing. So that would be much better if you could do that. Okay? Hope that helps. When you have these old plans and you're looking to combine them, you really want to go directly to the source. So if you have a profit sharing or a pension plan and you get notification about being able to roll over, not roll over, do anything like that, then what you really need to do is check with the plan provider or custodian to understand what the different options are and whether it's taxable, whether it's not taxable, and whether it's a direct rollover or not. Make sense? I hope so. I got a question today from one of my coworkers who wants to start saving money for his grandkids. And he says, I don't want to do a 529 plan. What if the kid gets scholarships? If I answer this question a million times, I will answer it once. Chances are your kid's not getting a scholarship for your full amount of money that is necessary to pay for college. But if you are that lucky, then you can move the money between siblings. That's one thing to think about. And if you don't like the 529 plan in your state, again, there are states where you want to go and look for these plans. Nevada, Utah, Alaska, Maryland. They're very highly rated. They're good plans. You do not have to be a resident of the state. And if you live in a state where there is a state income tax deduction, then definitely use the plan of that state. All right, you're listening to Jill on Money. 855-411-JILL. Send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger. Want to get in touch? Call or email any day, anytime. 855-411-JILL or ask Jill at jillonmoney.com.
You're back with Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, an insurance question, an inheritance question, you got a question, give us a call. 855-411-JILL. And you can also send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. So it looks to me like we're going to have about 80% of people impacted by that devastating Harvey in Texas did not have flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program. And, they're going to hopefully get some help from the government. It's just a terrible situation. And, as you read through all the accounts, it's just the damage is staggering. Now, first of all, if you do have flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program, you have to start this process of essentially, getting the insurance claim process started. And frankly, whether you are covered or not, you're going to make some sort of claim probably under whatever government assistance is available. And here's how you start. You start by taking a set of photographs before you move a thing. I mean, just every single thing, just take a ton of pictures. Then you're going to make a list of your damaged or lost items. If possible, the date of purchase, the value. I mean, if you have a receipt, great. No one's really going to ask you for that. But I know it's early days, but I would absolutely report the claim as quickly as possible. You know what we learned in Sandy, in the aftermath of Sandy? Insurance companies, they respond on a first-come, first-serve basis. And once you do report the claim, make sure you get that claim number, you write it down. The one thing that's kind of important also is that you don't do anything until you have the insurance company adjuster inspect the property and you've agreed on the cost of repairs. Because the thing is that's really important is that when you get this number that comes back, a settlement offer from an insurance company, that can be negotiated. So when you meet that adjuster, you want to kind of get the person's name and, find out whether do they work for the insurance company, are they independent, who do they deal with at the insurance company, if they're independent, So that's important. The other thing that's interesting is you've got to make sure that the adjuster is accounting for a regional difference in the cost of materials. For example, during Superstorm Sandy, which is awfully hard to say, there were a lot of claims that were made, and the insurance company would come back and say, okay, it's here's $40,000. And then people who were affected said, 40? Like, I can't possibly do the repairs I need to make for 40. It's going to cost me 80. And so if you see you can make a case for a higher amount based on where you are geographically. And also if you see that maybe there's an omission of a damaged item or the measurements are wrong, but specifically the lowball contractor costs. I think that's really important. I think if you're going to hire your own contractor, that's great. Make sure you get references and have evidence of insurance. Because sometimes what will happen is an insurance company's approved contractor comes out, and that's okay, but, I wouldn't go nuts with that either. Like, you don't have to hire that person. You may want to, but don't feel like you must. Okay? A few other things just to keep in mind. There is this thing called, this makes me nuts, there are folks who are out there, they're called storm chasers. You hear about this, Mark? So these are the exploitive contractors who rush into a disaster-struck region and they want to make a quick buck off of vulnerable people. Could you imagine anything worse? This is right up there. Like, you might as well, steal my dog while you're at it. Anyway, these fraudsters, they try to sell victims on phony repair deals. Maybe sometimes they'll sell you a car. Like, it can be a car, but it's a car that has gone through a flood. So, I mean, be really aware that this is happening. A big red flag when they demand payment up front. Don't do that. Don't be pressured. Don't sign a repair contract. Don't pay cash. Don't write a check up front. Pay in installments. And just be careful. When you are the most vulnerable, that is truly when fraudsters come out of the woodwork. It is annoying and it really just is sort of so disheartening to hear these stories. But have the information. We have a bunch of stations that air this program in Texas. We have plenty of people who are listening who have relatives in Texas. So if you want, go to the website, jillonmoney.com. We've got a long article about this that's posted. And yeah. Mark, why does that happen? Just a bummer, isn't it? It is inevitable, but it is not. It's just such a shame. So there we have it. Okay. This is Jill on Money. If you have a financial question anytime, just give us a call, 855-411-JILL. We'll get you on the air live. Go to jillonmoney.com and you can find that article and look at some TV stuff that I've done recently, whatever Mark puts up there. When we return, more of your questions. It's Jill on Money. We'll be right back. You're back with Jill on Money. If you've got a question, we'd love to hear from you. 855-411-JILL. Send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. Here's a question from Pamela in response to an article I recently wrote about reverse mortgages. Remember we had Sandy Jolly on the show. She was so great. She is not so jolly when it comes to reverse mortgages. But anyway, I mentioned her in the article. So Pamela writes that she is part of a condo association, and the condo association has explored the possibility of offering to apply for reverse mortgage qualification for the benefit of our homeowners. Makes sense, right? You're in a condo, but the association's got to be able to permit it. We now understand that in order to offer FHA reverse mortgages, which you kind of have to do because they own the market, the association must be willing to rent some minimum number of our units. I don't even know why that is. That's so weird that they I guess that's because if FHA ends up with these properties, it has to be able to rent it. That may be why. Okay, back to Pamela's question. Our declaration of condominium will not permit us to do that. Does that eliminate us from qualifying for this program? Yeah, it does. Now, that said, you may want to change your declaration of condominium. Maybe you do want to allow rental. Maybe you want to be able to, I would talk to someone at FHA and find out whether, would it be possible if you allowed rental 2 out of every 5 years or something, if that would be sufficient. Maybe that's one way to do it. And maybe I would just talk to, maybe I'd contact Sandy Jolly. She probably can tell you who might be able to help you out. But I mean, if you really are thinking about the organization as a whole, the condominium association, opening the door to rentals obviously can be sort of messy. Mark, what's your condo rental thing? How much? You can rent it for like a couple of years out of 2 out of 3. Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe you can do it, but good luck. That's about all I know. All right, stay tuned. We've got a fantastic interview coming up. It's with Dr. Mithu Storoni. She's written a book about stress, and we're going to help you de-stress. Jill on Money. The phone number here, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
It's the weekend, which means it's time for Jill on Money, the show that makes money fun and just happens to answer all your financial questions. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome to hour number 2 of Jill on Money. We are delighted that you are with us, and we have a special treat this hour. We have a doctor, Mithu Storoni, University of Cambridge trained medical doctor. She's just written a new book, and it's such a good one because at the beginning of the academic year, people always feel stress. So she has just written a book called Stress Proof, the Scientific Solution to Building a Resilient Brain and Life. Mithu Storoni, tell me a little bit about why you wrote this book. You are a doctor. You trained at Cambridge. You had this big career. Why write this book?
So I wrote this book because stress is it's a word that's used very loosely and very commonly. And we're all affected by stress. But I came across a series of studies that shows that chronic stress isn't just some kind of abstract concept which we sweep under the carpet. Chronic stress physically changes the structure of the brain. So when I began writing it, there were lots of animal studies that showed this, that there was thinning in parts of the prefrontal cortex, the area I just mentioned, and the hippocampus when you put animals through chronic stress. And actually the first big study to show that this effect also happens in humans has only just been published out of the Karolinska Institute. So chronic stress physically shrinks parts of the human brain, but the beauty is it's reversible.
That's the part that was amazing to me because I feel like sometimes we get into these cycles. And as you said, stress comes in all forms, but sometimes the financial stuff comes to the forefront. It almost can mask other stress because it's so concrete. So we get stressed out about money. What happens in your brain when, let's say, the market goes down dramatically and I start to get worried? Tell me what's happening in my brain.
So of all the stresses in the world, the biggest stressor known to humans is that of uncertainty. There was a really fun study done where 2 groups of people they took a group of people, divided them into 2. They told one half, you will now feel pain. And they heard a very sharp, shrill noise in their ears. They told the other half, you may or may not feel pain. There's a 50% chance you will feel pain. The stress response of the first group who knew they would feel pain no matter what was smaller than the stress response of the second group.
That's amazing. So just so I know I'm going to feel pain. I actually have a different reaction, a lesser reaction than the possibility of feeling pain.
Correct. So the uncertainty around the issue was more painful than pain itself.
So does that mean if I go to the doctor, I go to you and I go to your friend, you say to me, okay, you got to go to the doctor. And they say that moment where they're like, oh, we don't like how that mammogram looked. Let's go back in. So the moment that I have that uncertainty, I'm going to feel stressors. If they tell me bad news, yes, we found a lump, you have to have this. Are you telling, is that a different stress in that moment, or is that stress because it's knowable that I'm going to feel a little bit differently, or my brain's going to react differently?
So the stress response is different to uncertainty compared to the same situation that is certain. Now, admittedly, in the situation you described, you want to keep the hope there. Mm-hmm. But the uncertainty of it will still feel more stressful.
And it's amazing because if you think about being an investor or anything in your financial life is filled with uncertainty. And it's why I think people really tend to make really bad decisions so often, right? Because you have that stress and now you're prey to lots of different potential emotions that would make you react in a way that may not be in your best interest. So let's say that the market, you're worried about the market. It's going up, it's going down, but now it's going down. We're in the financial crisis and I'm stressed out about it. What can I do to relieve that stress?
So there have been so many studies carried out during the last financial crisis, and just 2 weeks of more market volatility significantly increases the levels of cortisol, and they found this on a study on some traders at a bank in London. So market volatility makes a huge impact. So what can you do to relieve it? Well, there are several things you can do. So your priority should be to keep your mind under control. And the way you keep your mind under control is by just taking a step back and looking at how the brain works. You have your higher executive brain, okay, who sits behind your forehead. And this executive brain assigns or decides which departments of your brain should come up, their volumes should be raised, and which departments of the brain should, take a back seat at every point during your day. When you are stressed, this coming back to decision making in a volatile market and volatile financial environment, this executive function is vital because whenever you're making your decisions, whether you're watching the markets go down or go up, when you're making the decisions, you're weighing at least three things. You're weighing the potential for reward, you're weighing the potential for risk, and you're weighing your emotional baggage on that background. So these three things are being very carefully weighed. And if you imagine if this were done, in a legal setting, you would want your judge to be very calm, to notice all the arguments, to see the entire scenery. So when you are acutely stressed, your prefrontal cortex and other parts of the brain that work with it loses this ability to make reasoned decisions because it no longer surveys everything. It becomes reflexive. So it only acts in response to the threats it immediately sees, to the salient threats, and to things that at that moment increase their risk value or their reward value. So it does not survey the entire picture. Also, as you just said, your cortical control, so your prefrontal cortex, the way it controls the rest of the brain includes its control over your emotions. So when you're in a state of heightened alert, when there's uncertainty, you think you will be threatened, so you're in a state of alert, and at that moment, your emotions are dysregulated, so you react excessively. You have too much fear or you have too much anticipation, and that changes the way you're making your decision. So in that situation, the best thing you can do is bring your prefrontal cortex under control. And I've got lots of tips in that book. But, for instance, one of the ways you can do that is sensory decoupling. So you can momentarily detach yourself from your environment.
How do you do that?
So I describe several tips in there. One way is first of all, you keep your attention anchored onto something else. And that something else has to be interesting enough and has to be big enough for you to completely detach your attention from your current, your computer screen or your bills or whatever you have in front of you. So you just want your attention to detach, to uncouple from the situation that's causing you the emotional dysregulation. Do that for a few moments, or do that for as long as you can. Once you do that, you bring the rest of your brain under control, under your prefrontal control, and then you can go back to the task at hand. So if you're going through volatility, you do that repeatedly.
All right, we'll get back to the interview with Mithu Storoni. Stress-proof. Don't we all want to be stress-proof? You're listening to Jill on Money, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Eight 855-411-JILL. That's the number to call to have your financial questions answered. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back with Jill on Money. This is the program that takes the mystery out of your financial life. And one of the great mysteries is, why do our brains lead us astray? To find out why, that's why we have our special guest, Mithu Storoni. She's a doctor, and she's written a new book called Stress Proof, the Scientific Solution to Protect Your Brain and Body and Be More Resilient Every Day. So back to our interview right now with Mithu. We're going to talk about, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I love in the book you say, you called something, said cognitive reappraisal. And I thought this was really interesting because what it really means is once you've disengaged, then you want to go back, right? And you write, cognitive reappraisal is when you take a second glance at your situation after you have disengaged your emotional brain. You re-examine the evidence rationally and pay attention to subtle features you may have missed before. So in that respect, is that a place where you either, forgetting about subtle features, is it you reminding yourself that, look, I'm a long-term investor. This is happening. I don't have to do anything. There's no need for me to do you tell yourself those things? And if should you tell yourself those things? Is that helpful?
It's very helpful. So the brain works in two modes, the short-term mode, the long-term mode. And it almost flips its status. So the long-term mode is goal-directed, and it's ignoring short-term risks, looking at long-term reward, and weighing short-term risks in terms of how it will affect long-term reward, not short-term reward. So when you have the mindset as a long-term investor, you want to pick up all the subtle cues around you. You want to not pay excessive attention to immediate risks. You want to analyze the whole situation as it stands with a long-term goal-directed point of view. When you are under chronic stress, so if you don't get a chance to get your cortex, your prefrontal control over the rest of your brain, you flip your status. You become about immediate things. It's all about what happens now. So immediate risks are magnified. They're amplified in your perception. You don't realize they are, but they are just in your head. And immediate rewards are distorted because they're weighed against these immediate risks. So your whole picture, and no matter how hard you try, your whole picture comes away from the long-term setting to the short-term setting. And your safety is threatened more by risk here and now than it would be in the long term.
I remember when I was a financial advisor many years ago, we would give people these big written plans, right? Printed out plans. And someone would said to me, I'm never going to look at this again. And I said, when you should look at it? When you're panicking, you're going to flip to this page, which reminds you that you're in this for the long term. You have this many years. This is what you decided. It's almost like you have to remind yourself what is true. I mean, the truth is that yes, it's volatile here and it's happening in the short term, but it's almost like to kind of whack yourself in the head and say, wait a minute, this isn't everything, right? Can I just go back, just a question about you personally? Did you start exploring this topic I mean, you're trained as a neurologist first, or what's
ophthalmologist first?
Ophthalmologist. Okay. So ophthalmology first. You love eyes.
I love eyes.
You love them. They are the window of the soul. So eyes first. Then what is neuro-ophthalmology?
Neuro-ophthalmology is the part of the optic nerve and the part of the brain that deals with vision.
Okay. And then how did that translate into stress? Or did you become like a total stress bucket in your life and then thought stress is like something I want to explore?
So actually it's both. But one of the things that really fascinated me is the pupils in the eyes. And this has huge implications in the financial world as well, because when you're making a deal with someone or when you're exchanging trust, this plays a role. Our pupils are the little black apertures in front of our eyes, and they are the only window that we have to the automatic or autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is the network of nerves that work without us doing anything. So they keep us breathing. When we get stressed, they raise our heart rate. They're always at work, even when we're asleep. So your pupils tell you their net activity. So if you know someone really well, and even if you don't, if you're talking to someone, you synchronize your pupil sizes. Isn't that astonishing?
Wait a minute. That happens naturally?
That happens naturally.
So if Mark comes in here and looks at me, he's going to see our pupil sizes are similar right now.
Are similar. They will get drawn to, a synchronized baseline.
Cool.
So your pupils don't just tell the other person about you, and they give nonverbal signals about what you're doing, but they tell they show you how the autonomic nervous system works, and hence they're a brilliant stress indicator. So they can tell you about the level of chronic stress, but it's relative to your own baseline. So it's a way of gauging it.
But if you were my doctor and you were talking to me and you were examining me and you were looking at my pupil size on a random day, you'd have a baseline of knowing what that was. And you could literally say to me when I walked in that day, oh, you seem to be under stress, because you would know that because I have a baseline. But I couldn't necessarily know that just meeting you now, right?
No, you couldn't know.
Darn it. I thought that was going to be a good way for me to go play poker next, but okay.
But the way the person's pupils respond to what you're saying when you're going through a negotiation or making, some kind of discussion, that tells you a lot about what's taking place inside the person's mind.
Okay, what should we be looking for? I'm fascinated by this.
So, look for, obviously everyone has their own variation,
right.
But you look for dilation, you look for, it's things that you can't explain, and why did that person's pupils just dilate so much just now?
Oh.
And that sort of subtle cue that can tell you a little bit. A deal point.
That's interesting. So, what about the idea of this world that is now essentially there's a lot of low level of human contact, not being able to look into someone's eyes. How is that changing what you perceive to be interaction, stress levels? I mean, in other words, if I'm stressed out by reading an email, the person could say the exact same thing and I'm looking into that person's eyes and I may not react the same way. So that almost tells me it's like a potential to read more stress into a situation than I need to. Is that possible?
It's entirely possible. And that works in two ways. So in one way, you can reduce the intensity of a negative message by putting it in print. But at the same time, when you put something in print, it can be misinterpreted very easily. And one thing with our technologically advanced world is it's made things very easy, and that prevents us from focusing. Because with multitasking and with quick solutions to things, we don't focus and work on things for very long. And coming back to what we said earlier, that is one way of training your goal-directed behavior, by working towards a problem, long-term solution. So it has lots of implications. Some are good and some are bad.
Okay, so you get drawn to the eye, and the eye is this read on lots of different things in the brain. Were you a stressed out person in general? What was your own experience around this?
I was probably the most stressed out person you can imagine.
No way. You're so calm, cool, and collected. I don't buy it. Mark, you reading her as stressed out? Not at all. No.
No, I said I was.
Okay. But what happened? So because you were studying, or what was going on? Because it's just a student life, I know it sounds crazy when we're not students, but it can be incredibly stressful.
It is. It's really medical residency and internship. That's what's very stressful. I think that the way I dealt with my stress and the way I realized that you can deal with stress is by coming back to prefrontal control, is by really training your mind for long-term goals and for self-control. Because in order to achieve a long-term goal, you have to have self-control. So, coming back to the idea of investing as well, you only learn to ignore things in your immediate surrounding which are unnecessarily loud in your ears at that moment by training your self-control. And as you said, by reminding yourself of the goal, constantly reminding yourself of the goal. And when you're going through, your medical training, you have a goal, and that goal is to specialize, to go through your board exams. But learning how to regulate yourself and learning how to change and switch your attention and get that under control makes a big difference.
All right, we'll get back with our interview with Mithu Storoni, MD, PhD, super smart. If you've got a financial question, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger. Have a question? Call now, 855-411-JILL.
You're back with Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, an economic question, a tax question, an insurance question, give us a holler, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. Are you wondering what will kick yourself into gear to get to that yoga class? Well, our guest, Mithu Storoni, a doctor, is going to tell you why yoga may help you reduce your stress. So one of the things that you found was a physical outlet for that was really helpful for you because you found yoga, right? And so explain how that helps you or any of us to do a practice of yoga or taking a walk or physical exercise, how that changes your brain and helps you kind of push some of those stress levels down or even just deal with your stress in a different way.
So ultimately, we should not look at stress as beginning below the brain. So it's not the brain starting the stress response. It's the brain interpreting the environment in a certain way and then triggering the stress response. And I'm talking about psychosocial stress, so not, injury-related stress. So if you start from it at that level, then how you're perceiving the world depends on which departments in your brain are on high alert and which departments are asleep or less active. So if your emotional circuits are always on high alert, your experience of your world will be very different. So if you get good at controlling the rest of your brain, so you can use the term self-regulation, you can use the term self-control, then your attention in your environment will be focused on the things that it should be focused on. So not things that are unnecessary or irrelevant. And the way yoga works is really by training your self-control. So if you imagine the most uncomfortable posture, if you've ever encountered in yoga, it doesn't have to be yoga. It can be anything else, but yoga is a great example. If you're holding yourself in that posture, you have 100 thoughts coming through your head. You think, this is uncomfortable, I want to get out of here. You're probably in some degree of pain because of the stretching, and you're really having to balance. All of that requires you to tell your emotional circuits to just be quiet, to activate your cortical circuits to control your attention, and to dampen down any pain or any discomfort that you're feeling. And with the brain, studies have shown that the more often you use this circuitry, the easier it becomes to use it. So if you practice this technique of self-control, in keeping yourself under control in discomfort, repeatedly, time and time again, then you grow more in control of where you place your spotlight of attention. And you apply that when you leave your yoga studio or your home and you go to the rest of the world.
That's fascinating, though, because it also, well, for me, just in my own, I don't do yoga currently. I have done it. But it was one of the reasons I hated the whole flow yoga thing, because I felt like I was never in one pose long enough to do anything. And so I so when I was doing yoga, what I really liked was Iyengar. You hold the pose. However, that moment where you're just in so much pain and your brain's blowing up, like hello for me, pigeon. I hate that pose, and that I almost remember feeling like this, where you're in it, you hate it, and then all of a sudden you're not feeling it in the same way. And so I guess that my question is, are you not feeling it, or you're telling your brain not to feel? Like, what's happening there? What has just happened in that moment? Is it just that you're so uptight about being in that pose and that causes the stress and the pain, or is the pain? Are you getting used to the pain?
So there are two things going on here. The first thing is that when you're in your pigeon pose that you're safe. Okay, you can actually leave that pose whenever you want. So as soon as you know that, you relax a little bit, but you reassign, you achieve more control over your mind, over your brain. That gives you control. And through that control, you train yourself to ignore the feeling of panic, or to restrain the feeling of panic. And that gives you a testing ground for doing that. Because if you do that repeatedly in your yoga room, the next time you feel panic in another situation, you will remember the circuitry you used to calm that down. And another way that works is that some of us are very aware of our interoceptive cues. So if our hearts start racing, for some people, we panic more. We think, oh my goodness, what's happening? But if you make your heart start racing in lots of contexts, in repeated contexts by doing yoga or whatever, then if it starts racing when you see your market slump the next morning, you are familiar with that. And you know what to do to bring yourself under control.
I see.
So.
Now, yoga as a practice is something that was supposed to be like you do this to then begin your meditation. So is there a difference in your work or in the research that you've seen between a physical activity and the idea of meditation, or both useful in different ways?
So it's very hard for someone to sit still. And one of the things I mention in my book is, for instance, immediately after a stressful response, don't do nothing, do something. And that's because it's very hard to tell your mind what to think. You can tell your mind what to do. Using that philosophy, yoga is a doing thing. So you're in a pose, your arms are knotted up. So if you can do nothing else, all you can do is just try to do the action. Mm-hmm. That trains your mind. Once you get that under control, the next step, to sit still and just tell your mind what to think, becomes easier. And that's why meditation is the next step.
Oh, that's interesting. And there's obviously a bunch of research that does show that meditation can be very helpful in a practice setting, right? I was being so good for a while. I've really fallen off the rails. So, but what makes me think that one of the reasons that I was feeling like why I fell off the rails is that it started to become a stress in my life. Like, oh my God, I got to wake up at 4 because I have to be up at 4:30. So I got to do my meditation. I got to get up at 4 and do it then, and da-da-da. And then what I found was something, I'm not going to make this all about me, but why not? It's my show. Then I found that I took my dogs on an afternoon walk, and I was walking briskly, and then I stopped and I sat on a bench in the park with the dogs, and that was like a perfect moment just to be quiet. But it was harder for me to do that, even though everyone says, oh, do it first thing in the morning. I couldn't do it first thing. I couldn't sustain doing it first thing in the morning. Is that just my own clock, or is doing something physical before you try to do something more contemplative a better path?
So I would definitely say never sacrifice your sleep for anything.
We'll get back to our interview with Mithu Storoni, talking about how we can reduce your stress. You'll just be happier and probably more productive. It's Jill on Money, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
It's the weekend, and that can only mean one thing. You're listening to Jill on Money. Here she is, Jill Schlesinger.
You're back with Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We are talking to author Mithu Storoni. She's written a book called Stress Proof. And one of the things that always is clear is that we have all been through rough times. What is the difference between those of us who are able to bounce back and those who are not able to bounce back? It has something to do with a single concept called elasticity. At the end of the book, you have a note about resilience, and I know there's been so much conversation around resilience and studies. You know, when you say resilience is the art of bouncing back, right? Everyone has stressful stuff that happens to them, but if you have an extraordinary event that's going on, how can you help yourself bounce back? Also, you know, giving short shrift to the idea that, look, you did go through something painful, right? You have to let yourself feel it. So I imagine that, you know, you've talked to psychiatrists about this where, you know, there's part of it is like you want someone to be resilient, but you also want them to process it and go through it. So what's the balance there and how do you do that?
So obviously I'm thinking a lot about what's happening in Texas, and it must be a horrific experience to go through at this moment. There have been a lot of studies from the earthquakes in Japan on resilience and on what works and what doesn't work. And one thing that they found is, so emotional suppression is bad, okay? So if you're frustrated, let it out, because someone out there will share with you, okay? But what's really, really important when you go through these big episodes is the illusion of control. So whatever environment you're in, you need to focus on nothing else but being able to control elements of your environment. So, you know, making little changes. So clearly, if you're in the middle of the situation, you can't control anything. But even in that situation, control what you can. Okay, predict what you can. Minimize uncertainty. When you speak to people, don't leave unended sentences. Give people clarity. Operate in a system that's very, very clear and certain. There was a very sad episode of terrorism in Norway a little while ago, and they surveyed people who were working in the government buildings when a car blew up for terrorism. And these people, you know, this is in a workplace context, but they then returned to work after this terrorist incident, and they surveyed everyone around them to see what worked for them. How did they get their resilience back? And the people who suffered less psychological distress after the event were those who were in environments where everyone worked very hard to increase certainty, increase predictability, know what you're doing, who is around you, where you are doing it, the extent of whatever it is you're doing, what you're trying to achieve. So just creating certainty and predictability is the most powerful thing.
You know, you also make a note about writing things down and how that can be very helpful in doing that. And I am a person who I love writing things down, but I was on TV, you know, literally the Monday after the hurricane hit, and I said to the anchor, you know, one thing that people can do is they can start literally making lists of what they think they lost. And the anchor looked at me like, you got to be kidding me. Like, you think someone's going to do that right now? But I think that maybe one of the reasons that I cling to things like that is that in my experience of seeing people go through bad things, when they wrote the things down that they had to do, it was that a little element of control. It was, you know, my father just died. Let me make a list of the people that I have to notify, or let me do this. And what is it about that writing down that is helpful? What's going on in my brain that's helping me in that moment?
So I'd say there are three things. The first is it's active coping, doing something active. Writing a list, you're expending energy to do something about it. Number two is when you're writing something down, you're using parts of the brain that need you to be rational. So even for a moment, you're having to rationally think about what you're processing to create a coherent sentence. And in order to do that, you're having to ignore the emotional circus that's going on in your mind, because you can't put that to paper. You're being factual. So that's the second thing. And I'd say that the third thing is, as you say, it's control. So it is, okay, you have something on your paper that is finite, it's solid, it's something you will work towards. No matter what is happening around you, you have that plan under your control.
I feel, first of all, I'm going to fire my shrink right now because I can just read this book. This is what's better about this. Mithu Storoni, I'm going to say with an Italian accent. When do you slap yourself in the head sometimes saying like, oh, I'm letting my stress get away from me? What causes that for you?
What causes stress for me?
Yeah.
So really, every day, we all work in different ways, and we have different lifestyles, different priorities. And certain things affect some of us more than the other person, even if we're in the same environment. What's really interesting is you can live the same lifestyle from a day-to-day point of view. But if I personally don't do some of the things that I've mentioned in the book, some of the ways, so what I do first thing in the morning, what I do in the middle of the day, if I don't do those things for several days in a row, I feel it. So actually every day making a conscious decision to really take care of your brain and to make these little tiny hacks during your day, they make a huge difference that you can suddenly feel after a week. So if I go on vacation and I ignore these things, I feel terrible. So just wake up in the morning and think you are the most important person in the world, which is true. Your brain is your most valuable tool, which is true. And everything else that happens is a consequence of that. So they should be your priority.
Well, thanks so much to Mithu Storoni, MD, PhD. Go grab her book, Stress Proof. So terrific. I learned a lot. If you want to keep learning, stay tuned. It's Jill on Money. Our phone number here, 855-411-JILL. Send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back. You're back with Jill on Money. And before we close out the show, there was one topic I was unable to cover with Dr. Mithu Storoni, the author of Stress Proof. And that is something that I think we can all really benefit from. So the idea that, you can really get in sync with somebody by looking into their eyes and your pupils turn the same size is totally freaking cool. However, here's something else. Think of it the converse of that. Mithu says if you surround yourself with genuinely happy and positive people, you can catch their happiness. She says that mood is infectious, which I love because this is another reason to remember that getting toxic people out of your life is a huge benefit to you in the long run. So here's the information, like the study behind it. There was a study that followed 4,000 people in a social network over 20 years and found that happiness can extend to up to 3 degrees of separation. If you are surrounded by happy people, you are more likely to be happy in the future. Now, the one thing is, of course, this is magnified by social media, but so is the opposite. So if there's someone who's bringing you down, if you can eliminate that person from your life, get them out. If you can't, let's say it's your boss, let's say it's a coworker, then you've got to figure out how to minimize your time with that person. And my theory about those like toxic, scary people is to kind of fake it and be like arbitrarily, incredibly happy around them. See if it makes a difference. See if your happiness will actually help that person a little bit. I used to work with somebody. I couldn't stand this person. Every time I see this person in the hall, I say, hello, so-and-so, how are you? And it's almost hysterical because this person can't help but saying back to me, oh, hi, Jill. Anyway, give it a shot. You have been listening to Jill on Money. 855-411-JILL. That's our phone number. Our email address, askjill@jillonmoney.com. Send us an email. Mark will flag it. Say hi to Mark. He is the best producer in the world. And stay tuned because next week we've got more of your questions. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you in a week.